Part 62. She Always Loves to Sleep. Author, Guy and Faye. Chapter 627. Chapter 612. Ajin, are you a superpower? Loss, you are more disgusting than we thought, Mr. Chi said. Law smiled nonchalantly, with a somewhat cold expression. Mr. Chi, I advise you to think about it carefully. After all, your daughter and grandson are still in my hands. Once he heard that he was threatening him with Chi Maui and Chi Saijin, Mr. Chi took a breath and almost lost control of his emotions. Fortunately, Chi Saijin pinched him immediately when he saw this, so he kept his sense and did not let himself be at a disadvantage. Since you have gone to great lengths to bring us two dying old men here, it means that we are very important to you. Therefore, Wai Wei and the others are the final bargaining chips. I believe you are a smart man and will not touch them. Right, Mr. Chi said calmly. That's not certain, Law smiled, with no warmth in his eyes. If my patience runs out, Baobuki will do something impulsive. What if I knew the core technology that made the seed program successful? Los's expression finally changed, his originally careless eyes narrowed slightly, and he said in a deep voice, What did you say? This experiment has been going on for decades, and there may be no gains at all. It's just because of what your father did back then, we hid it from him just to be on the safe side. In a corner where no one could see, Mr. Li frowned slightly and secretly glanced at Mr. Chi, his eyes full of doubts. What is the core technology? What is he talking about? The seed project has not made progress for decades, and the upper management has given up hope. They have also allowed this experimental project to fend for itself. Since they joined the project, due to the lack of support from the upper level, they have struggled to make progress, and the progress is very slow. Coupled with the lack of manpower, limited resources forced the seed project to be shelved, which was one of the reasons why Lo's father later went astray and conducted illegal human experiments. However, the doubt in Mr. Li's eyes was fleeting. After all, he had been an old friend for decades. At that moment, he immediately realized Mr. Chi's intention, lowered his eyes, and smiled slightly at the corner of his mouth. In this case, Mr. Li raised his head with a solemn expression and said sternly, What are you doing? His expression was very angry, as if he had been betrayed. Mr. Chi understood instantly and sighed, Old Li, at my age, the last thing I want is for my children to have something happen to them. Then do I just think about it, you can't say it no matter what. It was all our fault in the beginning, this is all retribution. Then have you ever thought about how many people will suffer from this? Mr. Chi nodded sadly, looked at Los, and said, So, you heard it too. If you want me to hand over the core technology, let the children go. Ross was not in a hurry to express anything, and his suspicious eyes wandered back and forth between the two of them. After pondering for a moment, he relaxed and said with a smile, It's not impossible to let them go, but you have no basis for what you say. I want to see it's something real. What? As long as you can create a successful case, I believe in you. Impossible. Mr. Chi categorically rejected it, I will not do anything related to experiments. This is a crazy and unethical experiment, and he will never touch even a single bit of it. He feels disgusted. Law spread his hands with a helpless expression, then there's nothing we can do. You don't want to, and I don't believe you. This is a dead end. The two sides reached a stalemate. The atmosphere gradually became stagnant. Suddenly, the door of the laboratory was opened again, and a man hurried in and said something to Los Er. His expression changed slightly for a moment, and he cursed a few words. Then he raised his head and narrowed his eyes at the two old men. Finally, he set his sights on Chi Saijin, who had been acting as a backdrop next to him, and said, You, keep an eye on them, and the rest of you will follow me. Chi Saijin was shocked. Although he didn't know what he meant, he immediately lowered his head and said respectfully, "Yes." Loss left in a hurry with the others. In an instant, only 3 people were left in the huge laboratory. Mr. Chi suddenly fell to the ground like a deflated rubber ball. Chi Saijin quickly supported his shaky body and shouted, "Grandpa!" Mr. Li, who had not yet reacted, was almost frightened out of his wits when he heard the loud cry. His eyes widened immediately, he pointed at him with trembling hands and stammered, you. Chi Saijin immediately tore off the disguise on his face and shouted, "Grandpa Li. Young boy Saijin." Chi Saijin nodded, "It's me. How will you be here?" "Well, I'll explain it later." He lowered his head and glanced at Mr. Chi, who looked unhappy, and said to Mr. Li, "Please, Grandpa Li, take care of my grandpa." Mr. Li blankly took Mr. Chi from his hand and said, "Okay." Chi Saijin stood up, looked around the laboratory, and calmed down to concentrate on sensing. Suddenly, he suddenly opened his eyes, and there was a faint flash of light under his light golden eyes. He stood there and pondered for a moment, stretched out his index finger, and the golden light condensed on the fingertip kept jumping. With a wave of his hand, the tiny golden light instantly expanded more than 100 times, and attacked fiercely around him. However, when it touched the experiment, when it fell on the wall of the room, it was as silent as water dripping into the sea, leaving no trace. Chi Saijin tugged his lips, turned around calmly after doing all this, but met the shocked and complicated eyes of the 2 old men. If they read it correctly just now, that is, a superpower? You. Mr. Chi said in a difficult voice, "Ajin, are you, a superpower?" Chi Saijin sighed and nodded. At this point, there is no need to hide the matter. Mr. Chi's mood immediately became excited, and his expression was even more serious than when he faced Los just now. "When did it happen? How long has it been? Why didn't you tell me?" His own grandson is a person with supernatural powers, but he, the grandfather, doesn't know anything about it. Chi Saijin lowered his gaze and pursed the corners of his lips into a straight line. He looked a little embarrassed. He didn't know how to speak. In other words, "I don't know where to start." He heard the entire conversation they had with Ross just now, word for word, and as a victim and witness of the experiment that year, he could not tell Mr. Chi all this frankly and frankly. Because he couldn't bear it. Even if it was Los's father who secretly planned all this, without the seed plan, the subsequent tragedy would not have happened. As one of the participants in the seed project, Mr. Chi was also one of the factors that harmed them to some extent. How does this make him speak? Chi Saijin paused and changed the topic. "Grandpa, it's not safe here. Let's talk about it after we go out." "But why way?" "Don't worry, they are safe. Probably. I don't know if Lao San escaped with them." End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 628. Chapter 613, New Experimental Subject Number 3. I have to say that Chi Saijin's worries are very reasonable. After He Yao and the other 3 escaped from the third wave of pursuit, the wound on her body was torn due to violent movements. The pain instantly made her bend over, her face was pale and bloodless. She covered the wound with her hand and spat hard. I cursed mother in my heart. These sons of bitches. When she regains her strength, she will definitely kill them. After cursing in her heart, He Yao raised her eyes and glanced at Chi Mao Yi, who was also in a state of embarrassment beside her, and couldn't help but sigh. In the past, she, Ji Yunchu and others had never been so embarrassed and defeated when they went on a mission. Now they were forced to flee across the mountains and plains by a few lackeys. It was really a disaster. Before she could finish feeling regretful, the pain in the injury began to intensify again, and she couldn't help but let out a breath. Hearing the sound, Chi Mao Yi quickly stepped forward to check nervously. "What's wrong?" "The wound has opened again." He Yao couldn't help but twitch the corners of her lips when she saw her eyes wide open and staring at him unblinkingly, with worry still shining in her clear eyes. This situation is not quite right. Shouldn't she be the one to protect them? Chi Saijin carefully entrusted the two of them to her before leaving, and she swore that they would not miss a hair. As a result, after so long, the person being taken care of became her. He Yao smiled bitterly. What a shame. I thought that I was an A-level superpower after all. I was the weakest in the team and the youngest, but at least it was better than other superpowers. I had taken on countless S-level tasks, and my immature hands it has long been covered in blood. But now, the person she needs to protect is treating her like an underage child with caution. It is simply embarrassing and humiliating. Although she is indeed considered a minor at the moment. He Yao took a deep breath and endured the pain to comfort Chi Mao Yi, who was about to cry, I'm fine. Chi Mao Yi's eyes were red, and her delicate and beautiful little face was covered by dust. She was embarrassed and haggard, and her whole person was in a fragile and helpless state, as if anyone broke through her layer of protection, she would collapse in the next moment. She sniffed and muttered, Brother Makino went to explore the road, and I don't know when he will be back. The three of them had been hiding for a day and a night. He Yao was injured again, so running around like this was not an option, so they thought of finding a temporary base nearby. Fortunately, He Yao and the others were used to wearing supernatural bracelets. Store weapons in them for emergencies. In this way, even if they encounter people from the Cha League, they will still be able to fight. So Lim Wei volunteered to go. Although the children from the Li family usually have some second-generation ancestors, they still have some kung fu skills. Coupled with the particle gun given to him by He Yao, even if he encounters enemies on the road, he will not hesitate. No power to fight back. Chi Mao Yi lowered her eyes gloomy. At this time, she misses Aju and Sangha very much. In the past, if something happened to her, they would always appear by her side to protect her immediately. But not now. They were captured and brought to a foreign country, far away from the imperial capital. Even if they thought about it, Aju and Sangha would not be able to fall from the sky in this inhospitable place in the next second. He Yao knew she was scared when he saw her expression, and said quickly, Sister Weiwei, don't be afraid, someone will come to save us. Chi Mao Yi nodded dully, I know, I just. She clenched her fists subconsciously. It was just the first time for her to face this strange situation and experience the dangerous situation on the edge of life and death. She was a little confused and at a loss. Fortunately, when she was awake, she was not alone and had them as companions, otherwise she could not imagine how broken she would be. He Yao looked at her pretending to be strong and smiled wanly, do you know? When I first killed someone, I was very similar to you now. Looking confused and at a loss, unable to believe whether he was in a real or illusory world. Simply put, it means not wanting to face reality. Chi Mao Yi's face stiffened and she said dryly, you, kill. In fact, it is normal for big families in the upper class to play with people's lives. Among wealthy families, few people have clean hands, but no one will say it openly. Chi Mao Yi is certainly no exception. She has heard about it, but she doesn't. Would love to learn more. First of all, she naturally dislikes this kind of thing and finds it disgusting. Secondly, Mr. Chi protects her too well and doesn't want her to get involved in this kind of thing. This was the first time she heard someone talking about murder so openly. Moreover, this person has stayed at her house for a long time, and she has always regarded her as her sister's future nephew-in-law. This generation seems to be a bit chaotic. This is not the point. Chi Mao Yi's face looked unnatural for a moment, but soon returned to normal. She realized that her reaction might hurt He Yao's heart, so she immediately explained, Yao, I didn't mean that. He Yao waved her hands indifferently, it's okay. She had expected it. Chi Mao Yi was still a little embarrassed. She was actually very curious about what kind of experience could make a girl stain her hands with blood at a young age, and she seemed to be used to it, discussing murder with others indifferently. But in this situation, it was not convenient for her to continue asking, so she silently closed her mouth. The two of them leaned against the thick tree trunk behind them, quietly listening to the wind in the forest. After a while, He Yao felt a little cold, her vision gradually blurred, her eyelids became heavier and heavier, and her head became very dizzy. Ayo! Chi Mao Yi noticed something was wrong with her and quickly pushed her a few times. He Yao had no reaction. Ayo, don't sleep. Chi Mao Yi's anxious voice kept replaying in her mind and became the last words she heard before she lost consciousness. My consciousness is so heavy and my head is so dizzy. In the darkness, it seemed like memories that had been forgotten in the corner came flooding out. You're not dead, are you? She heard someone ask. No, someone replied. His tone was cold, so indifferent that it made people shiver. He Yao slowly opened her eyes, and what came into view was a handsome and clear face. She blinked her big innocent eyes and looked at him curiously, then smiled brightly and stretched out her little hand to reach for him. But it's out of reach. Because her hands are too small and short. But she was completely powerless, as soft as a puddle of water. So, He Yao, who was only 2 or 3 years old, could only listen to this good-looking elder brother talking to another person. She is the new experimental subject number 3. She is too small. I think she will die after just one try. No 4, don't say that. No 2, what I said is the truth. Oh, they don't even let such a small child go. The good-looking elder brother seemed very angry, and his tone was gritting his teeth. What can you expect from a guy who has long lost his humanity? This was another voice, and it sounded like a good-looking older sister. No 7, are you awake? Number 7 hummed calmly. What to do with this little brat? She was just captured and will be taken to the experiment tomorrow, but I think she may not be able to survive tonight. It's better to die now if it's not the best. No 5, don't say that. Number 2 glanced at the other party helplessly, then returned his gaze to He Yao, sighing, let's give her something to eat early. Are you kidding me? Where can we get food here? Number 4 seemed to have heard some big joke, we have nothing to eat ourselves, where can we get food for her? And such a small cub cannot eat ordinary food to satisfy his hunger. Suddenly there was a sneer from the side, don't say that. When you first came here 3 months ago, didn't we get you something to eat? The voice paused, and then said, you were almost dead at that time, and you didn't care. You would eat whatever was given to you. Number 4 immediately blushed. He snorted coldly and said no more. Number 2 ignored their bickering and reached out to touch her forehead, as if praying, I hope you can survive here. Survive tenaciously in this that never sees the light of day. A large number of memory kills are coming, all from different perspectives, please pay attention to check. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 629. Chapter 614 Returning to the Old Place. When He Yao regained consciousness again, she was on a cold experimental table. The surroundings were so quiet that she could only hear the sound of the instruments running. She blinked her confused eyes, and in front of her eyes was a group of people wearing masks and looking at her in white coats. So small, can you hold it? She heard the group of people in white coats discussing. The above order may consider smaller instability factors to be smaller. Someone sneered and disagreed with the idea, fart. A bunch of idiots who can only talk the talk. Stop complaining and get started, I want to have lunch. Immediately afterwards, He Yao felt a pain in her arm, and a cold liquid was injected into her body. She quickly reacted, her mind was dizzy, and she felt like she was floating in the clouds. The next moment, severe pain swept through her whole body, causing her to feel pain. Exhale. It hurts. It has never hurt so much. She wanted to find her mother and tell her that it hurts. But she has no mother. While she was dazed, someone put his hand on her forehead and said, "No, the fever is severe." At this time, she realized in a daze that she had been sent back without knowing when, and she also had a fever. Another person walked up to her and stretched out his hand to check. His voice was very calm, "It's okay. It's a normal reaction after the experiment. Can you do it on the 7th? Such a young child can't help but have such a fever. You can do it if you can, or shut up." The man shut up decisively. I heard that number 7 was a disciple of a miracle doctor before he was captured. She was the only one among them who knew medical skills. Every time they came back from the laboratory, they would rely on her to simply treat them, otherwise they might have died long ago. He Yao pursed her lips and wanted to cry out in frustration, but she had just undergone the experiment and her vocal cords were damaged. When she opened her mouth, no sound came out, but big tears rolled down desperately. Number 2 noticed that she was crying and quickly held her in his arms. He looked a little flustered and coaxed unskilledly, don't cry. We are not bad people. Don't cry, baby." He Yao couldn't understand what he was talking about. She was only 3 years old and couldn't speak fully. She cried out of a child's instinct because she felt this place was scary and she wanted to go home. This idea is a bit naive. Which person who has been arrested doesn't want to go home? But now they can only stay in this small custodial room, wearing uniform lab coats, waiting for the fate of being slaughtered like lambs in a slaughterhouse. But they are already considered a lucky group. The Chalig has a rule that in vivo experiments are conducted in secret, so the number of experimental subjects cannot be too many, less than 100. Each experimental subject has its own number, representing their identity and data. Every time an experimental subject dies, they will catch another experimental subject to replace it, and the number will be the same as the previous experimental subject. In this way, it will not be discovered and the experiment can continue unimpeded. He Yao's arrival was because the last experimental subject number 3 had unfortunately died on the experimental platform. Kameng divided these experimental subjects into groups, with 12 people in each group. They were 7 groups. Fortunately, they had never been replaced, and He Yao was the first. Possibly due to physical reasons or luck, they had indeed escaped from the hands of death countless times, so this time, number 2, who had never believed in heaven, fate, or ghosts, prayed for the first time in his heart to keep the dying child in his arms alive. Fortunately, God heard his prayers and He Yao survived. While He Yao was in coma, she began to babble unconsciously, her pronunciation was unclear. Chi Mao Yi was taking care of her and had to lower her head to carefully distinguish what she was saying. Brother and Yan. This sound is very soft and thin, like a cat acting coquettishly, extremely seductive. This is the first time that He Yao showed the attitude of a minor girl after she regained consciousness. Chi Mao Yi was stunned for a rare moment. Lim Wei, who was next to him, saw her stunned and asked, "What's wrong?" Chi Mao Yi shook her head, "It's nothing, Ayao wants to make peace with herself." Lim Wei was also stunned for a moment, then smiled. "That's right, I forgot about her and Mr. Chi, oh, forget it, now is not the time to talk about this." He Yao's brows were furrowed, as if she was stuck in some bad memory, her lips were trembling, and sweat was forming on her forehead. "Fourth brother, be careful." She opened her eyes suddenly, and there was only fear and panic in them. He Yao gasped and her eyes slowly focused. After seeing the dilapidated and moss-covered ceiling above her head, she suddenly realized the situation she was in. She subconsciously wanted to jump up, but was supported by the person next to her. She tilted her head and met Chi Maoi's worried eyes. "Ayao, are you okay?" He Yao remained silent and did not respond. She struggled to sit up and looked around. They were no longer where they were. She asked in surprise, "Where is this?" Lim Wei, who was on sentry duty in front, turned back and replied, "The abandoned laboratory I found has no trace of anyone having been there for a long time, so it should be safe." He Yao was stunned for a moment, and then looked around carefully. Suddenly, her eyes paused. She didn't know if it was her imagination, but she actually saw some familiarity in this look. By some strange combination of circumstances, perhaps due to the chaotic memories of the time when she was unconscious, she subconsciously blurted out a name that had been hidden in the back of her mind for many years. "Which district is this?" "The base camp of the Kameng is divided into 5 districts." "Ah." Chi Maoyi and Lim Wei both looked at her blankly. "Which district?" "They haven't heard of it." He Yao realized what she had said and immediately stopped talking and didn't mention it again. Instead, she stood up slowly and reluctantly walked a few steps, rubbing the surrounding walls that exuded a damp and musty smell. The other two were puzzled by her actions. Suddenly, He Yao's movements stopped, and her eyes suddenly lit up. Those beautiful almond eyes were filled with too many complicated expressions in an instant. There is emotion, longing, helplessness, and disgust. All kinds of emotions are all-encompassing. Chi Maoyi is the closest to her, but He Yao feels extremely far away at this time. It turns out, this is here. He Yao stroked the traces on the wall that were almost invisible, her tone inexplicable. "The laboratory in District T1, I didn't expect to come back to the old place after so many years. The laboratory where she was imprisoned for more than a year. What a bad fate. However, this is also a good opportunity." He Yao felt much better instantly. At that time, the association invaded the Kameng. Although they destroyed the place when they fled, due to the rush, many things were not destroyed in time and were still hidden underground. For example, weapons. For example, strange stone. She is very weak now. In addition to awakening supernatural powers, the alien stone also has another function, that is, it can improve people's mental power. It's over, it seems to be collapsing, the timeline seems a bit confusing, I can't figure it out. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 630. Chapter 615 Strange. He Yao followed the vague memories in her mind and reluctantly remembered the entrance to the underground secret room. Just as the three of them were about to enter, there was suddenly a chaotic sound outside. It was the people from the Kameng who were chasing him nearby. "Get in quickly." He Yao quickly let the two of them in, quickly restored the disguise at the entrance, and dived in. The secret room has been abandoned for many years. There is dust floating everywhere in the thin air, and there is also a strange smell that makes people frown. Lim Wei sniffed it, quickly covered his nose and asked in disgust, "What is this smell?" "Don't worry, it's not poisonous," He Yao replied calmly. She rubbed it for a while, then stretched out her hand to press it, and the surrounding area suddenly became bright as day. "He Yao, tisk, I didn't expect it could still be used here. The systems in the laboratory are all self-contained and there is no central control. This is to prevent the data in the laboratory from being damaged in an emergency." Chi Maoyi and Lim Wei both opened their eyes wide and looked around in disbelief. If the two old men were still here, they would definitely find that the furnishings here were basically the same as what Los showed them. It's just that it's more like an attack here. All the instruments were damaged beyond recognition, papers were scattered all over the floor, and the ground was littered with broken pieces and was in a mess. He Yao just glanced at it, then strode over the scattered things on the ground, came to a corner, glanced back and forth. Suddenly, her eyes paused, she raised the corners of her lips, stretched out her hand and pressed it lightly somewhere. I saw that the originally ordinary wall suddenly dented, and a layer of drawers popped out from inside, containing an exquisite gun and several dark green abnormal stones. He Yao's eyes lit up with joy, and she handed the gun to the two people behind her. She held the stones in her hands, slowly closed her eyes, and felt the spiritual power flowing in them. From the moment she took out these things from the wall, Lim Wei's jaw had not closed. He was so shocked that he almost lost his voice. How did you know that there is dash? Do you have these things? But He Yao was concentrating on recovering her mental strength and had no time to be distracted to answer him. She just said succinctly, there are many similar places here. Look for them and collect all the weapons. Lim Wei stopped talking, didn't ask any more questions, and did as she asked. The two men then searched through the entire laboratory, not missing every corner, and soon collected dozens of weapons of different types. When Lim Wei saw this, his eyes looked like he had seen a ghost. At this time, Chi Mao Yi had found the last location. She took out the weapons inside, but was stunned at the few remaining exotic stones. Her eyes were on the strange stone, and she always felt vaguely familiar in her heart. She pursed her lips, frowned slightly, and stretched out her hand to Yi Shi without any clue. The moment she touched it, it was as if millions of fine needles were piercing into her mind at the same time, causing her face to turn pale, and she retracted her hand instantly. But the uncomfortable pain did not disappear. Chi Mao Yi covered her head, feeling a splitting headache. Sweat gradually broke out on her forehead, and the blood on her face faded. Lim Wei saw her squatting there with her back to him, looking a little strange, so he walked over and asked, "What's wrong?" Chi Mao Yi, "No, it's okay. I just feel dizzy after squatting for a long time." Lim Wei did not doubt her and turned around to search elsewhere. Chi Mao Yi held onto the wall in exhaustion, barely holding herself up. Because she was afraid of being worried, she endured the pain and bit her lower lip tightly without making any sound. Gradually, the needle-pricking pain in her mind slowly disappeared. She gasped and looked at the strange stone in front of her, her eyes blank. What's wrong with her? End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 631. Chapter 616, Fourth Brother, Long Time No See. Before she could figure it out, He Yao had almost recovered. She stood up and threw the used stones aside. The originally extremely hard stones turned into tiny pieces as soon as they touched the ground. Particles annihilate in the air. Have you found everything? Chi Mao Yi suddenly came back to her senses, stood up with a guilty conscience and replied, looking, the search is over. The moment she turned around, she saw that all the strange stones she had touched had turned into ashes like those in He Yao's hand. However, she was too concerned about her own strangeness and did not notice it. Lim Wei and she handed all the weapons they found to He Yao. He Yao glanced at them and nodded with satisfaction. Although these quantities were far from enough, they should last until they escaped from the Cha League and contacted the association. Enough. She raised her hand and swept it away. The pile of weapons in front of her disappeared in the blink of an eye, and she received them into her bracelet. Chi Mao Yi looked at He Yao carefully and saw that her complexion was obviously much better than before, so she asked, Yao, have you recovered? Her eyes were full of disbelief. A person who was weak and pale just now will immediately recover almost like a normal person. This is not in line with scientific common sense. Lim Wei was also very surprised, but said nothing. Along the way, he had witnessed too many things that subverted the three views. In comparison, this little thing was nothing. He Yao arched her eyebrows and said, 80 to 90% recovery. Seeing that Chi Mao Yi was still full of doubts, she explained kindly, well, how should I put it? The stones I found just now are called exotic stones. They contain very strong power and are equivalent to power banks for superpowers. They can be used to enhance power. It can also allow ordinary people to awaken and become superpowers. Lim Wei's eyes lit up. Really, that's not as good as. He Yao's face fell, and she rejected it before he could finish his words. No. It doesn't take a guess to know that he wants to try to use the strange stone to awaken. Why? Not to mention that the pain during awakening is very unbearable, but the risk of awakening is very high if you are not careful. You will die of mental violence, and the current situation is not suitable for awakening powers. Lim Wei had to give up his thoughts. Chi Maoyi had already stiffened. Awakening, power. Over there, Chi Sijin tried to take the two old men away as soon as possible. While supporting the two of them, he looked around cautiously, constantly using his mental power to destroy and tamper with the monitoring along the way. Grandpa, this way. Chi Sijin led the two old men around here and there, constantly reviewing the terrain here in his mind, and quickly calculating the safest and fastest shortcut to escape here. Just now in the laboratory, he clearly read a message when the man spoke. Those people ran away, and Mr. Lin had not caught them yet. It seems that He Yao and the others were discovered. Lin Yan alone was unable to catch them in such a large territory of the Cha League, so he came to Luz for help. And Los also understood that they were the best bargaining chips against the two old men, and there must be no mistakes, so he transferred all his hands to capture them. Chi Sijin raised the corners of his mouth without leaving any trace. This can be regarded as another sense in which the tiger leaves the mountain. Just when he was praying that He Yao and the others could last a little longer, Mr. Chi suddenly stopped, panting heavily, wiping the sweat from his forehead and saying, "No, I can't run anymore." Although he usually exercised a lot, his old arms and legs couldn't support such a running method, and he started to show signs of collapse after a while. Chi Sijin helped him up, pondered for a moment, and squatted down in front of him. "Grandpa, let me carry you." Mr. Chi waved his hand and refused. "No, Ajin, you can run alone." "Impossible," Chi Sijin frowned and immediately refused. Mr. Li also said, "Jin, your grandpa is not joking. You may be able to escape alone, but we two old men will hold you back. If you take us with you, you are taking 2 oil bottles with you." They still have this bit of self-awareness. In fact, from the moment they were brought to Kamen, they had already planned not to go back, which was okay. They had lived for decades and had lived well enough, and there was nothing they could not let go of. Perhaps the only thing I'm worried about is these children. But now it seems that Chi Sijin is safe and sound, and the others should be out of danger for the time being. The most important thing at the moment is to let them escape successfully. In comparison, the two of them don't care. Chi Sijin sternly said, "Impossible. Grandpa, I came here specifically to save you, how could I leave you alone?" Mr. Chi sighed, "Silly boy, how could you possibly lead us out on your own? Be good, be obedient, and leave quickly." Chi Sijin, "Grandpa." Mr. Chi, "Ajin, Grandpa can't run anymore. He wants to rest for a while. You should leave quickly." Chi Sijin gritted his teeth, leaned over and put him on his shoulder. He held Mr. Li firmly with his other hand and said in a deep voice, "I promised Wei that I would take you out, and I will keep my word. Arrive. You child. Why are you so stubborn?" At this moment, something unexpected happened. A leisurely and clear voice came from not far ahead, "Sorry, none of you can leave today." As soon as he finished speaking, there were chaotic footsteps all around, and in an instant, the 3 of them were surrounded by water. Facing the dark gun muzzles all around, Chi Sijin looked coldly at the group of people who appeared out of nowhere and couldn't help but curse. Fell into a trap. It's his fault, he shouldn't be so impatient. This haste revealed a flaw, giving the enemy an opportunity to take advantage of it. Law slowly crossed the crowd and came to them, with a slight smile on his face and a leisurely posture, without any surprise, as if he had expected all this to happen. He also held a red rose in his hand, which was delicate and tender, with bright and slender fingers, which made people endlessly reverie. He lowered his head and sniffed it, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became even bigger. Los raised his head and looked at Chi Sijin calmly. His eyes were happy and excited, with a hint of excitement, as if they were old friends he hadn't seen for many years. When he spoke, his tone was very familiar. "Fourth brother, long time no see." Everyone was stunned, and the two old men froze at the same time. Do they know each other? At this time, a crazy and absurd possibility appeared in my mind. Mr. Chi's eyes became extremely complicated and he did not dare to think further. How is this possible? How can that be possible? Possible. He closed his eyes resignedly and forced himself to accept this guess. Ajin was kidnapped when he was a child. If calculated carefully, it happened to be the date when those people conducted private experiments on living subjects, and more importantly, he knew Los. If he was not an experimental subject, it would be absolutely impossible for him to know Luz. Thinking of this, Mr. Chi's eyes were extremely dark. Chi Sijin stood there, narrowed his eyes deeply, and took off his disguise. Long light blonde hair was spread down, his eyes were slightly narrowed, and the ends of his eyes were long and narrow, with an unreasonable coldness that shot towards Luz like a knife. His tone was almost hardened to ice, and he said every word, "Los, sis. Los, I'm here, what do you want my fourth brother to do? Why don't you die?" End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Faye. Chapter 632. Chapter 617. Join us. Lo seemed to have heard some big joke. "Fourth brother, I haven't seen you for so many years, and you want me to die as soon as we meet. I'm so sad." Chi Sijin sneered, "Really? I see you are quite happy. It's very happy. There is nothing more joyful than seeing old friends again." He took a step forward, and Chi Sijin immediately guarded the two old men behind him. This man has always been insidious, and there are no tricks if he can't protect him. Los paused, sighed, and frowned slightly. "You are still the same as before." He raised his head, his whole demeanor suddenly changed, and his tone became a bit gloomy. "You are all the same as before, no one believes me." Chi Sijin did not accept his behavior. "Stop pretending, I find it annoying." Los raised his eyebrows and regained his gentle look. His face changed so quickly that it was astonishing. He lowered his gaze, plucked the petals, and said in a nonchalant tone, "Lin Yan said that the person he captured ran away. His people searched the entire Shemeng and couldn't find him." Chi Sijin's eyes flashed. "Later, I thought about it carefully. Although Lin Yan is a waste, the men I gave him are not those who have the ability to escape from the Shemeng headquarters. Must not be ordinary people, but should be fellow travelers. Los, it's really surprising that among the children of the Li family and the Chi family, there are actually people with superpowers." He shifted his gaze to the two old men and said incredulously, "I thought that you two would never let your children touch this field in this life." Mr. Chi clenched his fists and closed his eyes helplessly. Los twitched the corners of his lips. "I never expected that, fourth brother. You are actually the second young master of the Chi family. How ironic, have you forgotten that year?" "Shut up." Chi Sijin shouted sharply and looked at him with an extremely cold gaze. "You don't deserve to mention those days." Los chuckled, "Fourth brother, don't be angry. You must have heard what I said to the two old men just now. What do you think?" Chi Sijin paused and glanced behind him subconsciously. "What can I think? The culprit who caused you to become an experimental subject and suffered so much was actually your own grandfather, and... Loss watched calmly as Mr. Chi's eyes suddenly widened and the corners of his lips raised. It seems that Mr. Chi doesn't know about this yet. He asked Chi Saijin in confusion, "Fourth brother, didn't you tell your family?" That's right. According to how much Mr. Chi hates people with superpowers, I'm afraid he will be very angry if he finds out about it, and he might even sever ties with you. Loss looked at Mr. Chi and asked, "You think so?" Mr. Chi, I. Mr. Chi looked panicked for the first time. He looked at Chi Saijin standing in front of him, his mind was in confusion, and he couldn't help but think of some past events. Chi Saijin was kidnapped when he was 8 years old. At that time, the Chi family used all their forces to surround the imperial capital. After a thorough investigation for 3 days and 3 nights, no one was found. Only later did they find out that the kidnapping was not for Chi Saijin. Jin went there, but his parents, Chi Jingyuan, the second master of the Chi family, and his wife Zhao Yulan. The purpose of the other party was to force the Chi family to make concessions. Who knew that Chi Saijin's parents were busy at that time and could not accompany them? When he went to the amusement park, the other party decided to do the next best thing and tied him up. Later, after investigation, it was found that the kidnapping was indeed done by a family that had a hostile relationship with the Chi family. Why did Chi Saijin fall into the hands of the Kameng? Mr. Chi closed his eyes sadly. "Ajin, what happened back then?" Chi Saijin sighed in his heart and said, "Grandpa." He paused and seemed to be thinking about how to express it more tactfully. "Back then, you used all the channels of the Chi family to blockade the imperial capital and vowed to find me. Those who kidnapped me saw that the situation was not going well, so they secretly sold me to a human trafficker. He was later bought by the Kameng." When Mr. Chi heard these words, his heart suddenly throbbed with pain, and his voice was choked with sobs. "Then you came back later, why didn't you tell me?" Why didn't he tell them what he was suffering and insisted on holding it in? Thinking back to the beginning, they almost all thought that Chi Saijin had been ripped off. Chi Jingyuan and his wife were in agony every day. Zhao Yulan even suffered from severe depression for a time and almost didn't get into trouble. Who knew that half a year later, there was news about Chi Saijin? After he came back, Zhao Yulan's condition has improved a lot, but she was worried that Chi Saijin would cause psychological problems due to the shadow of the kidnapping. After long discussions, Chi Jingyuan decided to move abroad with his wife and son, and did not return to China until recent years to develop. Chi Saijin laughed twice. At that time, there were other reasons. After the association rescued them from the Cha League, it really wanted them to return to their parents and relatives and stay away from the fire pit of the association and the Cha League. But he himself disagreed and voluntarily joined the association and embarked on the path of being a superpower. Since he was a child, he has only returned to the Chi family a handful of times, so Mr. Chi and others naturally do not know his identity. Mr. Chi, alas. What can he say? Ross looked at the grandparents and grandsons with expressions of watching a good show. He couldn't help but clapped his hands twice and said, "What a great relationship between grandparents and grandsons. Fourth brother, I specially invited Mr. Chi to help me restart the seed plan this time. I didn't expect to receive this unexpected surprise from you." Chi Saijin's eyes turned cold. "So? Otherwise, why don't you come and help me too?" Los thought for a moment and said, "You and I were both experimental subjects back then and have experience in the seed project, and the 2 old men are one of the planners. It's perfect. If you can join, you may have a greater chance of success." Chi Saijin was a little amused by his whimsy. "Do you think it's possible?" "Why not? You, the leader behind the association, don't you know that I am a member of the association's second monitoring team, directly subordinate to the president, and also one of the president's direct disciples?" Chi Saijin sneered. it would be too whimsical for you to ask me to join you. But Ross dismissed it. What good is that old immortal Zhong Cheng? I can give you whatever he can give you and what the association can give you, and even more. He smiled and said, "Fourth brother, for the sake of our friendship when we were young, are you sure you don't want to think about it?" Chi Saijan's eyes darkened, and he raised his left hand back, using the power in his palm. In the blink of an eye, a golden light appeared, condensed into substance, and he suddenly attacked Los with lightning speed, carrying endless killing intent. Before Los finished his last words, he was caught off guard. But just for a moment, there was a hint of ridicule in his eyes, and he was not overestimating his own abilities. He also activated his supernatural power in the palm of his hand, and a red light flashed in an instant, and he rushed forward without dodging. Two rays of light met in the air, causing chaos in the surrounding airflow and forming a violent gust of wind, which caused everyone to stagger around and almost lose their balance. The two of them faced off for only a few tens of seconds, but the winner and loser were already decided. They immediately stopped their hands at the same time and stepped back. Chi Saijan only took one step back, while Los took more than 10 steps back before he could stop. He was panting slightly, his face was slightly pale, and there was sweat on his forehead. It's been a bit rough lately, and it's not far from the end. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 633. Chapter 618. The association comes to the door. Los bent down slightly and relaxed for a while. Having just confronted Chi Saijan, he was a little overwhelmed by his mental power. He wiped away the blood that spilled from the corners of his lips without changing his expression, and sneered, "Fourth brother is really not polite at all." Chi Saijan's palms gathered strength again, and his tone was cold. "What is there to talk about with you?" As he spoke, he narrowed his eyes and planned to take action again. However, Los did not panic at all and raised his hands slightly. The people around him immediately understood and raised their weapons, all with their dark muzzles pointed at Mr. Chi and Mr. Li. Chi Saijan made a move. Los looked at him with a half smile. "Fourth brother, I advise you to think twice before you act." Despicable. Chi Saijan clenched his fists, but in the end he put his hands down because he was concerned about the safety of the two old men. "Thank you for the compliment." Lo snorted and waved again. The people below immediately stepped forward to hold the two old men, and threatened, "Be honest." "Grandfather." Chi Saijan's expression changed and he quickly stepped forward. The next second, he was pressed against the back of his head by the cold muzzle of a gun, unable to move at all. He turned his eyes slightly and saw Ross appearing behind him at some point, with a gun in his hand, and his index finger on the trigger. With just a slight move, he could kill him. "Don't move around, you might get into trouble." Chi Saijan's eyes were extremely cold, and the aura in his body was rising steadily. The coldness was so cold that it felt like falling into an ice cave. However, Cross's expression did not change at all, and he still looked casual and leisurely. He sighed in Chi Saijan's ear, "Since you don't cooperate, don't blame me for being merciless." The next moment, he suddenly raised his right hand high and stabbed Chi Saijan with something. Chi Saijan groaned, and suddenly felt that his whole body was limp, as if all his strength had been drained away, and even his mental strength could not be felt at all. He suppressed the pain, gritted his teeth and asked, "What the did you do?" "Ross, this is a newly developed potion, specifically for people with superpowers. The stronger the strength, the more obvious the effect. Fourth brother is the first user. How do you feel?" "Low, Si." Chi Saijan's tone was full of uncontrollable murderous intent, and she wanted to skin him and remove his bones immediately. However, Ross was not affected by him at all and released the hand that restrained him. Chi Saijan's whole body suddenly fell to the ground as if he had collapsed. Fortunately, he was held up by someone, and his hands were restrained behind him, making him unable to move at all. He took out his handkerchief and wiped his hands, and said condescendingly, "The effect of this potion is very long-lasting. Unless you use the antidote, you will always look like this. So, I'll give you time to consider whether you want to cooperate with me." Los leaned down and looked directly at him. "Fourth brother, please don't challenge my patience." After saying that, he straightened up and ordered, "Take the three of them back." "Yes." The three of them were quickly taken down. At this moment, someone suddenly ran in and said to Los, "Chief, it's bad. People from the association are coming." Everyone was suddenly shocked. The association came to our door so quickly. However, Los's reaction was particularly calm. He replied that he understood, and then said, "Let Lin Yan take my babies to solve it." The man hesitated, "But Mr. Lin is tracking those people who escaped. Tell him to come back. He's a useless thing. If you let him see you as a person, you can still let people run away. He's a waste who fails to achieve anything but fails." "Yes, yes, my subordinate, go now." As soon as he turned around, he heard Ross say again, "Wait a minute." He stopped immediately, turned around and waited for orders. "Tell Lin Yan to go play with the losers in the association, and I will personally go and meet those few fish that slipped through the net." Yes. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fay. Chapter 634. Chapter 619 Fishing in Troubled Waters. The night is low and the moon is shining over the treetops. He Yao and the other three cautiously groped forward in the dark night, always paying attention to the constant movement coming from around them. The Kameng has intensified their search efforts, and more people are following them. Although they have solved many problems along the way, they still cannot take it lightly. Danger often occurs in the most inconspicuous places. This is her experience over the years. Suddenly, there were bursts of rustling noises all around, which was particularly abrupt in the silent darkness. It seemed that there was a hidden danger quietly brewing. He Yao stopped and gestured to the two people following her to stop. The three of them squatted together. She raised her wrist and swiped twice on the supernatural bracelet. The next moment, the virtual three-dimensional terrain map was projecting it into the air. She pointed to a place and said, "This is our current location." Then, he moved his finger lightly and drew a straight line on the map until he could barely stop at the edge of the map. "This is the easiest exit to break through. Based on the distance, it shouldn't be far, but I don't know how well the opponent's personnel are guarding. If there are too many people, it will be difficult." He Yao frowned. It's certainly not a problem for her to get out alone, but it may be a bit tricky to ensure the safety of the remaining two people. Lim Wei thought for a moment and suggested, "Otherwise, let's get in touch with the outside world first and coordinate the inside and outside. Would it be easier to escape?" Unexpectedly, He Yao objected, "No, I sensed a signal detector nearby. If we contact the outside world now, the signal will be captured and our location will be exposed." Lim Wei looked at her in surprise, not expecting that a person with superpowers could actually act as a detection radar. Been taught a lesson. However, if this method doesn't work, it will be really troublesome for them to escape. After a moment of silence, He Yao suddenly said, "In this way, we pretended to be people from the Cha League and waited for the opportunity. Now they have sent a large number of people to catch us. The people are messy. It is a good time to fish in troubled waters." Lim Wei and Chi Mao Yi looked at each other and nodded in agreement. Following the route on the map and the vague memories in He Yao's mind, they soon arrived at the outskirts of the Cha League's base camp. This is a ravine with unfathomable depth. A dense barbed wire fence has been erected along both sides of the bank. It is indestructible. High voltage current is also passed through it, and it is connected to a mental resonance device to prevent ordinary people and people with supernatural powers from escaping. These are actually not problems. The problem is that because of Los's plan, the number of people defending here is at least 3 times greater than usual. Looking at it, it is full of people from the Cha League patrolling on the move, and there is no chance at all. Chi Mao-ei lay in the grass, raised her head slightly, took a look, and said worriedly, "What should we do now?" Lim Wei was beside her, maintaining the same posture as her. Seeing this situation, he frowned and said, "It's not good." He Yao didn't say anything. She just squinted her eyes and carefully observed the flow of patrol personnel. She secretly calculated in her heart. After confirming it 3 or 4 times, she finally said, "You guys wait here, I'll go." As soon as she stood up, Chi Mao-ei grabbed her arm and asked worriedly, "Be careful." He Yao hummed, stood up and left. Soon, she came back, but she changed her appearance. She was dressed as a member of the Kameng. She almost scared the 2 of them to death, and she also carried back 2 Kameng members who were knocked unconscious. He Yao, change it quickly, you will be noticed when it's over. Chi Mao-ei immediately squatted down and started to change her clothes, leaving Lim Wei standing there blankly, staring at the 2 people who had fainted on the ground, with deep eyes, wondering what he was thinking. He Yao noticed something was wrong with him and asked, "What's wrong?" Lim Wei took a deep breath, raised his head and looked at her. His expression became extremely complicated, mixed with a hint of weirdness. "Are these 2 men?" "That's right, there are no women in Chemeng." "No. I mean, you carried 2 men back at once." His tone was extremely incredible. As he spoke, he looked up and down her small body, with a puzzled look on his face. He Yao's mouth twitched, and she stepped forward and patted his shoulder with a gentle tone. "Second young Master Li, I can resist even 3 of you. Stop being curious and change quickly." Lim Wei's expression suddenly became more complicated. "I was just thinking." He Yao, huh? Lim Wei, Qi Anyun will be blessed from now on. He Yao. Without waiting for her to make a lot, Lim Wei immediately changed his clothes very wink. He Yao snorted and did not argue with him. He led the 2 of them and cautiously approached the Cha League patrol team. Before leaving, Chi Mao-ei whispered, "What should we do with these 2 people?" He Yao glanced at the ground, waved her hand, and a cluster of blazing flames flew out from her fingertips and fell on the 2 people. It instantly became a prairie fire. In just a moment, the 2 of them were burned to ashes. "Leave no trace." Chi Mao-ei widened her eyes and covered her mouth, forcing herself not to scream. This was the first time she had witnessed the destruction of corpses with her own eyes. Lim Wei's expression was quite calm, if the strangeness that flickered in his eyes was not ignored. "Okay, let's go." Her power is fire, she can control flames, and she masters it very skillfully. Even if she destroys corpses, no one will notice the slightest trace. At first glance, it seems that practice makes perfect, and I often do this kind of thing. The leader of the patrol team was a middle-aged man with a rough voice. After the team marched for a while, he left the team and stood aside to carefully check the number of people in the team. Suddenly, he was counting and felt that the number of people was wrong. He frowned and counted again, but it was still wrong. This time his expression became solemn, and he immediately ordered, "Stop." The team members stood still as if pressing the stop button. He called the last member of the team and asked in a deep voice, "Why are there a few people missing? Where are the people behind you?" The man paused for a moment. "I don't know, I was obviously following you just now." The captain's expression suddenly became even worse. Just when he was about to give the order to be alert, there was a sudden movement in the grass behind him. "Who is it? Come out," he shouted sharply and raised his weapon. The people behind him also picked up their weapons and stared at the source of the sound with bated breath. Just when the atmosphere gradually became stagnant, He Yao walked out first with her hands raised, begging for mercy. "No, No, no. Don't shoot, it's one of our own. Behind her, Lim Wei and Chi Mao Yi also appeared in everyone's sight. But the captain still did not relax his vigilance and asked coldly, "Where were you just now?" He Yao chuckled, "Isn't this, I have 3 urgent needs, so I took my 2 brothers to relieve myself with me. Do you need someone to accompany you when you go to the toilet, are you in kindergarten?" He Yao laughed dryly, "I feel so scared when I in a place like this." The captain squinted his eyes, observed for a while, and then asked, "What is the password?" He Yao immediately replied, "The night is quiet and the spring mountains are empty." The captain finally dispelled his doubts. "Okay, let's return to the team." Yes. End of this chapter. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fei. Chapter 635. Chapter 620. Will you continue? The 3 of them followed the patrol team and swayed slowly behind the team. They were worried that they would be exposed, so they kept quiet and did not say a word along the way. The accident happened suddenly in a period of silence. "Oops, there's an enemy attack." An unknown person shouted something in the communication channel, and everyone suddenly fell into panic. The captain of the patrol team immediately gave the order and stopped everyone who started to panic. "Why are you panicking? Just calm down." Faced by his intimidation, everyone stopped and did not dare to make any move, but they still made some sounds of fear and panic. The captain pressed the communicator and took a closer look at the situation. After learning that the association suddenly launched violent attacks from multiple directions at the base camp at the same time, he couldn't help but curse a few times, "Damn it! How can they know the base camp so well? These areas under attack are all the weakest defenses of the Cha League and are extremely easy to be breached. Everyone listen to my order and immediately take up arms and reinforce the nearest T2 area. The place has been deserted for a long time and became a ruin more than 10 years ago. Even after the current leader reorganized the alliance, the place has not been rebuilt. Who knows, the association has taken advantage of the loophole." Yes. He Yao and others also followed them, but the distance became farther and farther. "Let's escape quickly while they are in chaos." Chi Mao Yi asked doubtfully, "But the association is here, can't we just go and join them?" He Yao shook her head, "No, the risk of being caught halfway is greater than the risk of successfully reuniting. On the contrary, most of the patrol teams and garrison personnel here have been taken away to reinforce the T2 area, which is a considerable gap. The 3 of them escaped without any problem." He Yao's eyes flashed. Although she also wanted to join Li Ju and the others as soon as possible, there were still 2 people behind her, so she had to make sure nothing went wrong. This night is destined to be a sleepless night. The association caught them off guard, and the T2 area had the worst defense and was unable to fight back. Everyone in the association worked together to create an overwhelming force, and all the surrounding members of the League were mobilized to resist. In the huge flow of people, only 3 people moved cautiously in the opposite direction. The closer she got to the target, the more cautious He Yao became. Her eyes were fixed on the protective net not far away, and she used her mental power to detect that there was no living thing other than them within a radius of 1 mile. She waved to the 2 people following her, "Let's go." 10 meters. 5 meters. 3 meters. 2 meters. Seeing that he was about to reach his destination, He Yao's expression suddenly changed and she stopped her feet suddenly. Etc. Wrong. Something is wrong. He Yao scanned the surroundings vigilantly, suppressing the strange and uneasy feelings in her heart. It was so smooth. Even if the Kameng is violently attacked by the association and needs reinforcements, it is impossible to leave no one behind in such an important territory as this. But now, the surroundings are quiet, and you can only hear the rustling of the leaves in the wind, as if countless dangers are lurking in the darkness, waiting for the opportunity to swallow them all. He Yao, let's go quickly. She dragged Chi Mao Yi and Lim Wei and wanted to go back, but it was too late. Bang, a gunshot rang out. Bullets pierced the air, coming at them from the darkness, hoping to kill them with one hit. He Yao pushed Chi Mao Yi away suddenly, causing the other party to stumble and fall to the ground. Her arm hit the gravel, and the blood immediately soaked her clothes. Normally, she would have screamed, but now, she didn't even cry out in pain. Her eyes were full of fear, and she was stunned. He looked at He Yao as if he had forgotten the pain. He Yao grunted and let the bullet bury itself in her shoulder. This was the best result she could think of at the moment. Otherwise, Chi Mao Yi would have died just now. Hide quickly, she endured the severe pain and gritted her teeth and said to the two of them. Lim Wei reacted quickly, picked up Chi Mao Yi from the ground, turned around and hid behind a tree in the back, just in the blind spot of the opponent's sight. After they hid, He Yao no longer had any worries. Her eyes suddenly turned sharp, with murderous intent everywhere. I really think that because she has concerns, there is nothing they can do about it, right? In order to protect Chi Mao Yi and Lim Wei along the way, she tried not to fight with the people of the Kameng. Now it seems that the other party completely treats her as a weakling. A cold look flashed across He Yao's eyes. The next second, she took out two miniature P-32 particle cannons from her bracelet without hesitation. It was rumored that one cannonball could destroy a small nuclear bomb in a villa. She tilted her head, put it against the scope, looked coldly at the direction where the bullet came from, and said without any emotion in her tone, "Go to hell." Speaking, he pulled the trigger without hesitation. Almost instantly, powerful artillery shells exploded in the silent valley, and the flames shot straight into the sky, lighting up the night sky. When everything subsided, you could see the flames raging in the distance and the thick smoke. You don't have to see it with your own eyes to imagine that the place was reduced to ruins and all life was extinct. He Yao stood there and watched quietly. The firelight illuminated her pale little face. The recoil of the P-32 particle cannon was very strong. Her wound was torn open by the shock, and her blood suddenly drained faster. At this speed, we'll die soon. But she couldn't think about herself now. The enemy had set up an ambush here, which meant that they had expected them to come here. This place was no longer safe, and they had to leave immediately with Chi Mao Yi and the others. Snap dash. Just when she was about to turn around, there were suddenly 2 or 3 bursts of applause. He Yao was immediately alert. Who? There were footsteps from behind the tree, and then, a figure slowly walked out. Following the moonlight and the light of the fire, He Yao could see his face clearly. That is a young and handsome young man with a gentle and outstanding temperament. He has a slight smile on his face and looks gentle and harmless. However, He Yao's expression suddenly changed. Because he was holding Chi Mao Yi's throat. His men were pointing their guns at Lim Wei's temple. The other party's eyes fell on her and they made no further moves, as if she would kill them immediately if she dared to act rashly. Who are you? He Yao's injuries were very serious, but under the current situation, she couldn't show any signs of weakness and had to hold on. If you look closely, you can find that her body is shaking slightly. Law stood behind Chi Mao Yi and said in a playful tone, "Xiao-san, it's been a long time no see." He Yao frowned when he heard that he could accurately call her code name. Who are you? Law sighed, his tone a little aggrieved. Why, I haven't seen you for more than 10 years, and you have forgotten your 11th brother. He Yao's pupils shrank sharply. Los. She had no time to think and blurted out, "Why are you still alive?" Los was silent for a moment, and then sighed quietly. "Fourth brother is like this, why are you like this? I'm so sad." He Yao captured the key words from his words. What did you do to the fourth brother? Law said innocently, what can I do? Of course I should treat him well. After all, we have grown up together. He Yao looked as ugly as if she had eaten a fly. Who has feelings for you? She wished she could die immediately. The next moment, she endured the severe pain, used her superpower to attack him. Her strength was unreserved, and her murderous intent was revealed. Unexpectedly, Luz was faster than her, and the strength of his grip on Chi Mao Yi suddenly became stronger. She was almost out of breath, her face turned purple, her hands struggled desperately, but it was useless, and no sound came out of her mouth. He Yao immediately stopped, not daring to take another serving. Loss admired her hateful face and smiled, do you want to continue? If he continued, he would not be able to guarantee the 2 lives in his hands. He Yao clenched her fists, but finally loosened them helplessly and withdrew her powers. The next second, she felt a pain in the back of her neck and was knocked unconscious to the ground. Loss looked at her coldly and snorted, I didn't pay attention for a moment, but they all ran here. He looked at the place that was flattened by He Yao in the distance and narrowed his eyes, it's such a pity. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fei. Chapter 636. Chapter 621 Are you out of your mind? He Yao and the others were taken back by Los and imprisoned together with Qi Sijin and others. Seeing that He Yao had been knocked unconscious and thrown in, Qi Sijin's expression suddenly changed. Regardless of the strength he was losing, he rushed forward to check, third brother. As soon as his hand touched He Yao's shoulder, he felt a sticky touch, which was blood. He looked up at Ross, what did you do to her? Loss, don't be impatient. After all, she is the sister I knew when I was a child. How could I attack her? She was injured by my hands and it has nothing to do with me. Qi Sijin didn't buy it, gritted his teeth and looked at him, wanting to tear him into pieces. Lo sighed helplessly and waved behind him. His subordinates immediately understood and threw Lim Wei and Chi Mao Yi in. Makino. Why Wei? Seeing their granddaughter and grandson, the 2 old men could no longer remain calm and rushed forward to see if they had anything on their hands. Loss looked at their nervous expressions and clicked his tongue, what a profound love between ancestors and grandchildren. However, he only expressed emotion and took no further action. He looked at them deeply and turned around to leave. At this moment, the ground suddenly shook violently. Loss's eyes darkened, and after the shaking slowly subsided, he said, I found this place so quickly. He paused, and then left with the people. The surroundings fell into silence again. After making sure Luz and others were gone, Mr. Qi breathed a sigh of relief. He looked at Chi Mao Yi, who was shivering in front of him, and asked eagerly, Wai Wei, did they do anything to you? Are you injured? Chi Mao Yi has just experienced the death threat from Los. She is now a little frightened and her eyes are slightly dull. She looked at Mr. Qi blankly. After confirming who the other person was, her eyes instantly became moist. She threw herself into his arms with a cry and vented all her grievances. She is so scared. She was really scared. As the apple of the Qi family's eye, she has been pampered as a princess since she was a child. She has never experienced anything like this. She just accompanied Mr. Qi to a party, but ended up being kidnapped and hunted down, and she also witnessed the subversion. The existence of the three-dimensional superpower, even though the surface is very calm along the way, the heart has already collapsed. But she couldn't show it because she knew it would drag others down. He Yao protected her and Lim Wei along the way, so she couldn't be a drag. So, even if she was scared to death, she had to pretend to be strong. Listening to Chi Mao Yi's sobs, Mr. Qi suddenly felt his heart aching to death. The corners of his eyes were sour and his voice was choked with sobs, I'm sorry, It's my fault for causing trouble to you. While comforting Chi Mao Yi, he raised his eyes to look at Lim Wei on the other side and asked, Boim Wei, are you not hurt? Lim Wei is also in a state of unease now, but he is better than Chi Mao Yi. He even comforted the two old men in turn, I'm fine, Grandpa, don't worry. Although they were hunted non-stop all day and night, because of He Yao, except for some superficial injuries, they were not seriously injured at all. Mr. Li also looked at his whole body carefully for the first time. After confirming that there were no obvious wounds on his body, he breathed a sigh of relief and secretly rejoiced, that's good. He thought something bad would happen to them, but now they appeared in front of him unscathed. It was a blessing among misfortunes. But the word instantly raised Mr. Li's heart to his throat again. What's wrong? Lim Wei turned his attention to He Yao, who was lying in Chi Sijin's arms, whose life and death were unknown. He clenched his fists unconsciously and said in a particularly heavy tone, if it wasn't for Miss He, we would have died long ago. As he spoke, a hint of sadness flashed across his eyes. In fact, He Yao was fully capable of escaping on his own, but in order to protect the two of them, he was injured like this and even was willing to be captured by the Chalig. Hearing this, Chi Mao Yi also raised her head, rubbed the corners of her red eyes, tugged on the corners of Mr. Chi's clothes, and sobbed, Grandpa, A Yao was seriously injured trying to save us. What? Mr. Chi's expression changed. He looked at Mr. Li and felt mixed emotions in his heart. Even, deeply ashamed. It's all them. If it weren't for them, these children wouldn't have suffered such a disaster, and they wouldn't have. Grandpa, I don't care about your business, Chi Sijin suddenly said. He seemed to have anticipated what Mr. Chi was thinking at this moment. He tugged at his bloodless lips and couldn't help coughing twice because he was suffering from great pain. Ajin. Chi Mao Yi was startled by his appearance. She hurriedly ran to him and asked in a panic, what's going on? What's wrong with you? She was a little incoherent. Chi Sijin gave her a forced smile and said miserably, you just discovered me now. I thought this dead girl had completely ignored him. What the did you fart? I just. Chi Mao Yi was so angry at his nonchalant tone that she cursed, her face flushed, but her confidence was a little lacking, and her tone became lower and lower until it disappeared in her mouth. Just now she was really afraid of losing her sense of proportion. She desperately shrank into Mr. Chi's arms, seeking a sense of security, and completely ignored him. Chi Sijin looked at her aggrieved expression and wanted to laugh at her, but couldn't help but cough violently. Chi Mao Yi hurriedly stepped forward to help him calm down, but he held her down and said, don't worry, I'm fine. What do you mean it's okay? You're already like this and you're still trying to be brave. Caught off guard by her roar, Chi Sijin was stunned for a moment, and then laughed, so, you care about me so much? You, fart. Miss Chi swore again, snorted lightly, turned her head away, and vowed never to pay attention to him again. At this time, in this place, in this situation, one is completely exhausted and useless, and the other is in a state of embarrassment after having been hunted down, but these two nominal aunts and nephews can still argue with each other. Mr. Li looked on in amazement and said, Lao Chi, your family style is quite cheerful. Mr. Chi, it has nothing to do with family tradition. These two people will definitely not be able to live happily once they meet. Mr. Li chuckled, but it's okay. Mr. Chi, yes. In this situation, we can only have fun in the midst of hardship. However, this situation did not last long. Because He Yao woke up. Her eyelashes trembled slightly, and she slowly opened her eyes. She subconsciously wanted to get up, but the next moment, because the excessive movement involved the wound on her shoulder, she couldn't help but let out a cold hiss. Chi Sijin's eyelids twitched and he quickly held her down, don't move. Is your shoulder still injured? However, because he couldn't use any strength at this time, pressing down was just a matter of putting his hand up. Yao blinked blankly, a little confused about the situation in front of her. Fourth brother. Her words of fourth brother instantly attracted everyone's attention. Chi Saijin noticed those complicated looks and swallowed. Yeah. Where is this? Have no idea. Are we locked up? Where are the Los people? Have no idea. Yao's expression suddenly became confused. She slowly straightened up and sat up. She looked at him in bewilderment and asked a question deep in her soul, are you out of your mind? How come I just don't know? Sorry, Wei Wei's name for Mr. Qi was wrong, it has been changed. End of this chapter.